For a myriad of reasons, we've been behind on these, and I sincerely apologize to both you and to the Fanhome team, but let's get back to it. I'm Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for GamingTrend.com. I apologize in advance for my voice. I'm still sick, but today we're going to assemble the Mark III Iron Man armor from Fanhome. This is episode number 47 through 50. Let's unbox this thing and see what's inside. As usual, I went ahead and unpacked everything. We've got the 4 comics here, as well as this premium base guide. We kind of covered the premium base first part of the assembly right here during our last outing. And now we're going to finish up that base, or at least move a little further. It's crazy when you look at how many of these we've done. I mean, this is an insane amount, but set those aside for now. So the second half of that assembly guide, and then looks like a little bit of War Machine, Rebel armor, space armor, and then special movie issue armor. So we're probably going to talk more about the Avengers based off the movie arcs that we've been kind of following thus far. So we're going to start off with this premium base portion here. I went ahead and pulled out that large metal base piece. This is that large metal sound that we heard just a minute ago. You might recall that we were putting the electronics into that. That's going to make this light at base, so that way when we have the full assembly of the Iron Man, it'll stand up nice and pretty, and it'll have a light that's underneath. So opening this up, it looks like it's this center cover and then some KP screws here. So go ahead and pull those out. And this is going to be a really easy assembly. This is going to be just dropping these handful of screws into the underside of this to secure this in place. So I'm going to flip this over and do exactly that. Folks who are watching this, you'll have to let me know how you like the new cameras. I did purchase these new cameras specifically for these overhead shots so you can see this a little bit more clearly. So I'm hoping that this is easier to see and that the color is a lot better. I think they look great, but I'll leave it to you to let me know. Let me know down in the comments if you can tell the difference between this and the old Canon M50s that I was using. For reference, these are Blackmagic cinema cameras. This is a 4K and that's a 6K. Obviously YouTube doesn't handle 6K resolution, barely handles 4, but it does allow me to get a better shot, and the cinematic lens gives me a more, well, cinematic look. It gives me a lot more clarity to play with. If I can shoot in 6K, it means I can zoom without having to manipulate the lens. I can do that in post. As usual, they've given us 6 screws to do the work of 4, so we've got a little bit of extra screws to set aside. I do tend to keep these. As I've mentioned before, you never know, especially if you drop one onto your carpeted floor, you'll wish that you had spares. So I do encourage you at least keep a box nearby like I do, and just throw them in there when you're done. But easy peasy. There's a nice stand for this Iron Man to stand on eventually when this is all done. And according to the instructions, that really is it. That's the whole thing. So that's our first piece done. As I mentioned, due to my voice, we won't be spending a ton of time on the story, but as I did mention, number 47 is about Rhodey, specifically War Machine. In the books, I should say, in the movies, Rhodey suffers a catastrophic bit of damage. Vision overshoots his target and takes Rhodey out of the air. Rhodey ends up going through surgery, and ultimately, I mean, the way the movie kind of treats it, it was bad, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the way it is treated in the comics. So in the comics, Rhodey suffers tremendous amount of damage, and most of the time he's wearing the armor just to hold him together. He wears the face mask mostly to make sure that people don't see his face because he's just that messed up. To the point that Tony even attempts to clone his body. So there's a whole side story around War Machine and Rhodey's kind of recovery that is covered in the history of Iron Man here. So This may look like familiar territory, this Mark III right foot armor. We did this obviously on the left side. Now we're going to be repeating that same assembly on the right side. I did a quick check and you can see that we have all of the pieces that we need, and I've gone ahead and unpacked all the screws. So we are ready to go. I went ahead and grabbed the boot from episode number 46, where we went ahead and assembled this boot for the first time, then we set it aside. So it has the repulsor in it, but it doesn't really have much more than the electronics and that button to turn it on when we load a battery in it, which there's our battery. So we'll be getting to that portion, but first we need to load up a couple of side pieces here. So number 47, that is a joint. So we're gonna grab this and drop this right onto the side. That's going to give us something to adhere that front boot piece to. So we're going to set that aside and we're going to grab, let's see, well, the boot. Oh, I remember this now. So this is the one that kind of requires a little bit of kung fu, because we've got to get the boot and not drop these pieces off the side and then drop a screw into each side. So this requires some good kung fu. But kind of slips over like so, and it helps if you actually have the screw handy so you can drop that in. Looks like we're going to be adhering that with a CM screw, so grab one of those. Stay put there. Yep, it's a little fiddly. All right, we're gonna have to make another pass at this, because I think I've dropped just about everything at this point. So we'll take out that screw again, we'll slip out this boot again. Hopefully I can do it a little more smoothly this time. When you have this many moving pieces, there's bound to be some fiddly bits. But they don't want metal on metal, which I appreciate. They want to be able to have you manipulate this long into the future, so they want to make sure that you've got this plastic slip disc in here to allow that to happen. This makes for a really fiddly bit of assembly here. This again. I'm sure there's an easier way, and I'd be interested to hear any of you that have managed to do this already, how you did it. I don't know if a piece of tape would be better. Maybe kind of slip that through, tape it down, and then drop this in place. I don't know. There's got to be an easier way, but I'll get it. In fact, I think I got this one side right now. Maybe. As usual, don't tighten down both sides, because if I dropped out this other piece, I'm gonna be hating life. Oh, but I didn't, so cool. All right, so we'll grab this other CM and carefully drop that in before it gets out of alignment. And this front toe piece should be done. Piece cake. All right, now these pieces are going to go on the outside. I apologize again. I'm not going to be pausing every time I need to cough, otherwise this video never gets done. So I'll just apologize in advance. Make sure you've got this tightened up to the level that you want it to be tightened, because you're not going to want to take these out once you get them in. There's a little pair of holes for these to pop into. Once they're in, you're not going to want to take them out. just like so, and it actuates freely. So this is done. All right, the next piece is gonna be flipping it over and putting the sole in place. That's just gonna be another set of screws to cover that plate just like that. Another really easy assembly. This is gonna use EM screws. So that's gonna be these ones. And they'll go in on the outside. They'll go in on the outside. Takes a big man to laugh at himself. Takes a bigger man to laugh at that man. Go. Bottom of the boot is all set. So that's looking good. Next part is putting in the battery and closing up the lid. So we'll pop out the battery. By the time we get through all these, it'll be time to change the batteries again. All right, I have found that you can use the battery itself to kind of wedge this in. Just gotta remember which side is which. A set of tweezers also works pretty well. Just gotta remember which side. Let's see, the positive goes towards the little button here. So I gotta remember which side's positive. Positive is the flat side, so that's gonna be just like that, I think. There we go. We got a light, so must have done something right. All right, so we've got the battery in. Now we just gotta get the cover on. So episode 45 is when we unpacked this, so just grab that out of the box. That drops in just like that, and then this EP screw, again, they're always going to give you spares, is going to lock it in place. I can hear how much wheezing I'm doing, so I just apologize. I hope that's not coming in over my lavaliers. That's terrible, I'm sure. I know that I was wheezing like crazy in the Creed boxing game I reviewed. I didn't realize the PSVR was picking up my wheezing. So my boxing sounded pretty special. Being sick is always miserable. Being sick publicly is worse. The last part is this slip cover that goes over the top. This has a magnet on top of it, so all it's gonna do is lock onto this little magnetized piece, but I just noticed something. I'm actually missing the magnet there. So I'm not sure why I'm missing that magnet, but I'm gonna have to find out, because obviously that's not gonna stick without the magnetic piece. I probably have a spare magnet that I can glue on the underside of this. I'll just need to take off this bottom piece again because I don't have a magnet obviously anywhere in the packaging. And I don't think it references a magnet in here. Yeah, there's no magnet in the list. So I'm definitely missing a magnet piece. The good news is I have actually talked with Fanhome about missing pieces or damaged pieces, and they've had no problem swapping those out for me. Their customer service is top shelf and they're fast. So I can set this aside, and I know that I'll be able to make a quick phone call and I'll have this piece replaced pretty quick. So no problem there. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this aside and we'll take a look at what's in the rest of the comic. The latter half of the comic for this particular episode covers somebody who's just criminally underdeveloped on the TV series and also on in the movies, which is Maria Hill. I mean, she's given a tiny bit of backstory, and Colby Smulders does a fantastic job playing Maria Hill, but they just don't give her enough to work with. She's a human, she doesn't have special powers, but that doesn't stop her from kicking all sorts of ass in the shows and also in the movies. She's, Nick Fury's kind of Johnny on the spot. She's able to take care of whatever, whenever, wherever. And it's just frankly underserved. So it covers a little bit of Maria Hill's backstory, how she ended up taking control of S.H.I.E.L.D. and ultimately even becoming really the person in charge of the Avengers before Tony backed off and let Captain America take off as the leader of the group. So if you want to learn more about Maria Hill, this is your opportunity to do so. The last bit of armor is the zero gravity armor, and this was kind of a one and done, like a lot of Tony's armors. This was an Iron Man suit that came about. Tony was asked to step away from being Iron Man for a bit, and Rhodey stepped up and picked up this Iron Man suit that had significantly higher levels of stealth technology than even any of Tony's other suits. And it also had freezing capabilities, so it could freeze things and allowed him to just remain concealed and go on these kind of stealth missions. And ultimately, Tony takes control of the armor once again. Rhodey's very reluctant to give it up. This is another one of those moments where Rhodey's given a really cool piece of tech, and Tony has to kind of go and rescue it from him. So, another day, Rhodey. Sorry. Episode 48 is kind of interesting to me. So it covers the Rebel armor. And why I find it interesting is that it kind of mirrors a lot of the technologies that have come into play more recently with planes like the F-35 and its high recoverability. The F-35, you can actually shoot off wings and do a significant amount of damage to that plane, and it can still recover itself. It can do so in a completely automated fashion. It can land itself. Even if it's a dead stick and the pilot is incapacitated, the plane can land itself. So this is one of those, art becomes science and vice versa. So this is dreamt about in the comics, and it's something that has now come to fruition in the real world. So Tony's dreaming about ways that he can, of course, protect himself from himself. He has all these issues with his heart, and now he's trying to think about what happens if he would become incapacitated in the suit. He's obviously got a lot of power in this suit. He doesn't want it in the wrong hands. So how can he make it kind of future-proof and Tony-proof, where he has no chance of it being lost? And naturally, that brings about a fresh new villain to take advantage of those capabilities in new ways, and that's Absinthe, who ends up taking over Tony's systems as a sort of virus that infects him. And I'll let you read about that. I'm going to spare my voice for the next part, which is the right knee joint. Now, the right knee joint is just the same as it was on the left side. We're just obviously assembling the other side of it. This is one of those ones where you're not really assembling much. This is putting a couple of screws in, and then in the next episode, we'll actually put the two pieces together. So just a quick check. We have the cover of the right knee joint. We have the right knee gear ring, and then we have the screws to obviously put them together. We're gonna lay this out like so, and it, as usual, can only go in one way. So we lay it in place like so, and the little arms line up right over the holes, and we drop the two EM screws in, or LM screws in, and we are done. It's funny, LM screws, and I was just sitting there talking about Lockheed Martin. Coincidence? Yes, it's coincidence. It's complete and total coincidence. There really isn't much to this assembly piece, so it's complete, and we're going to go ahead and set it aside. The rest of the comic covers the Crimson Dynamo. Now, if there's a more ill-fated suit than the Crimson Dynamo, I'm not sure what it would be, because 13 people have worn this suit since 1963, and almost always with fatal results. Even one Mr. Anton Vanko has worn this. I am interested to see if they're going to bring the Crimson Dynamo forward. There's been a lot of opportunities to do that in the movies, and that hasn't happened. But we also do have the Disney Plus show, the Armor Wars, so that would be where I would expect to see suits like the Crimson Dynamo. But this particular Russian armor has popped up throughout Tony's kind of professional career as Iron Man, and Tony's always laughably been able to kind of swat it away. But you know, as we move kind of from the silly 60s to the more serious geopolitical stuff of the more modern Iron Man, you know, the armor's gotten more sophisticated and certainly more difficult to defeat. So it'll be interesting to see if they pulled this out of the vault, if you will, for Tony to take on in the Armor Wars. Rebel armor is kind of a blast to the past. So Tony obviously created the original gray suit, Iron Man suit, while he was in captivity, and the Rebel armor is a very similar situation. So captured by the Mandarin, this is kind of him redoing that entire path where he's created this armor out of scraps out of other armors. And it's built in such a way that it's just ridiculously overpowered, with the intent of taking on Mandarin's entire army using this single suit of armor. It's very much a stopgap and a single-use armor until Tony can get back to his regular laboratory to be able to make use of his normal armor. But it is one of his many, many, many armors, so it bears mentioning. So that finishes up this episode, and now we will move on to episode number 49. Episode 49 sees Tony taking on a very familiar foe, and with some familiar friends to help. So we have Maya Hansen. She was the person who helped create Extremis, and we saw how that was kind of treated in Iron Man 3, except that this is actually the Mandarin. So in a prior comic to this, Tony had actually cut off the Mandarin's hands, so he lost his rings. Obviously we have in the movie, they're more like bracelets, but in this case, they're actually rings. And the Mandarin, not to be outdone, simply takes the rings and installs them in his spine. So it allows him to still make use of all the powers of the Mandarin, and Tony ends up having to engage with that Extremis stuff to try and battle him. But he doesn't want to do that because he realizes that the more he uses Extremis, the more it's going to take over his body. So he's resisting that and using some older armor, specifically the Centurion, the Silver Centurion armor. He's able to confront the Mandarin and take him on without having used that Extremis armor piece to do that. Ultimately, you know, you kind of see where all this is going. He ends up having to use the Extremis armor to stop a series of missiles from hitting the Earth that would have all effectively just ended the Earth. So once again, he defeats the Mandarin at great personal cost to himself. So to do that, he obviously uses the space armor, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But first, we're going to get to this right knee joint. This is another one that doesn't require a great deal of assembly, so we're really just taking the pieces out. We have one difficult piece, though, and that is this tiny bit of adhesive tape. Adhesive tape has always been my enemy, and I don't think that's going to change today. But it looks like we have all the pieces. We have the washer, we have the lower knee joint, we have the rotating ring with the aforementioned double-sided tape. So we're going to take this piece from the previous round, and we're going to drop this spring over the top. Look at that, assembled. Cool. And then, actually I guess we do have to drop one more piece in, and that's this little part here, so there's some place or something to manipulate there, and then we'll drop the spring on top of it. But first, we need to apply this adhesive tape before we do any of that to this ring. This is easier said than done. I'm going to try and do it freehand. It might be better to do this with a set of tweezers. The mileage may vary. But the idea here, you can see, is to have it lay over the edge like this. I don't know if you can see that really well. I'm going to show that to the camera. And then remove the outside edge. This is one of those things where if you don't have nails, you might have trouble with this. If you don't have tweezers, you might have trouble with this. A lot of ways that this can go really sideways, and when you're done, it's clear, so it makes it even harder to see. But trust me when I say it's on there. All of that so it can sit inside this little detent here and not go anywhere. It'll just make it easier to assemble. So drop that in place, push that down with my pinky. Of course it flipped over, so now it's just adhered to my pinky. Did it flip over again? No, I think I got it this time. All right, so push that down in there and it doesn't come back out. So that's really all the double-sided tape is for. It's just to help that stay in place. So that's really all the assembly. This is gonna go on top, but I'm hesitant to do that without a screw to lock it down, which we get that in the next piece. So there's very little else to do other than clean up the tape here and take a look at the rest of the magazine, or I should say graphic novel. Now, if you've watched our coverage on Gaming Trend for any length of time, you know that I'm a sucker for art books. So this is obviously right up my alley. These are all of, well, I don't want to say all, it's a great many of Iron Man's most epic covers for his various comics throughout the years. So we have kind of from the early 50s, kind of Tales of Suspense stuff, all the way to modern and every step in between, including Civil War, which I highly recommend. That is a great kind of compilation, if you will. So you can kind of see Tony's evolution throughout the ages, all the way up to even through 2020. So what we refer to as the before times. And then we move right into space armor. This was kind of a one and done armor, like a lot of Tony's armors. This was kind of a send off for two outgoing artists, specifically Matt Fraction and Salvador Lorca. This was their, La Roca. This was kind of their send off. It was kind of sending Tony on a vacation as they were kind of headed out the door. So if you want to read about the space armor, this is going to take care of you for that. And that, my friends, is the end of episode number 49. And now we're going to take a look at episode number 50, and we're going to build out the rest of this knee joint. Episode 50 is a movie special, and it does cover the events of Civil War. So I can't for the life of me imagine that if you're watching this, you've not seen the Marvel movies. So Civil War is obviously one that should be high on your list. It's one of my personal favorites, right after Winter Soldier. And it does actually talk a lot about the Winter Soldier. So really it kind of goes over Bucky coming out of that program, and it's really the first introduction of Black Panther. We see the events that lead to T'Chaka being killed and T'Challa taking over as Black Panther. Man, what a loss. What a loss. And we see Baron Zemo kind of manipulating the Winter Soldier into kicking off the Civil War between Tony and Captain America. And we finally see Sony releasing their tight grip on Spider-Man, so that's a great thing. So again, if you have not seen the Winter Soldier movie, or you haven't seen Civil War, what are you doing? Just stop right now and go watch it, seriously. I just can't recommend those two movies enough. Of all the Marvel movies, those are easily, by a wide margin, my favorites. So now let's get into this right knee joint, and we'll finish up that. I spoke too soon. So we take a look at the knee joint. This is going to be another one of those ones where you kind of put pieces together and then you set it aside and hope that maybe next time you'll get screws to finish it off. So this is one where you're going to want to probably leave it in the package and then wait for the next set of boxes to come in so you can finish up this piece, because the last thing you want to do is pull them out of the packaging and then lose them. So in this particular case, all you're really doing is taking these washers and you're putting them over the top of these two pieces right here. They kind of lock in place. There's some holes, and they just kind of drop on top like so. So they probably won't go anywhere. I mean, it's not really a concern. That does not want to pick up there. But just the same, you know, it's better if you can kind of finish the assembly, and then you know you're not going to lose any pieces or misplace them. I mean, it's a month between these boxes, right? Or at least a couple of weeks. So I personally would, when I see these kind of assemblies, I would set it aside. The alternative is you can get really sick and then be, you know, a couple of weeks behind, and then you have boxes to spare. So we'll get to assembly. You're gonna hear this nasty voice a few more times. Boy, that does not want to stay put. Yeah, this is a good example where that washer doesn't want to stay put. It'll get held together when I get some screws behind this. But nope, there it goes. And then this cover, I believe that's gonna go on the other side. Yeah, we're not even placing this on there. That's going to go over the top of that once we have a screw inside. So we're just going to set this aside for now, and that's going to be the end of that for now. I'm just going to leave that inside, and we'll take a look at the rest of this particular episode, and then we'll close out. Now, one of the things that I don't think a lot of people realized until they watched the movies and then maybe picked up a book or two after the fact is that Marvel didn't have to retcon Spider-Man into Tony's life or into even Captain America's. Spider-Man's actually been a big part of the Avengers from the beginning, and his mentorship under Tony and all the various different spider suits that Spider-Man has received has been through Tony's largesse. So he's been the benefactor of Peter's kind of growth technologically, and that includes like the Iron Spider, and it includes, you know, nanomachines and all these great things that Peter would never have been able to do on his own. So a lot of that is covered in this trip to Washington, which you'll see some parallels to these Spider-Man movies. It's great that the lawyers did not prevail and people were able to get together and make this happen and allow these relationships to form on screen. When you think about kind of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and even prior to that, the Sam Raimi movies, they didn't have any of that element, and they were certainly lesser for it. So, you know, it's great to see them kind of finally together, and you kind of see the results of that in this. That does finish up this particular episode. Again, I apologize sincerely for my voice. I'm hoping that the wheezing isn't coming through, and I hope that you got something out of this. I always enjoy doing these. I love putting these together for you guys, and you guys always seem genuinely excited to see them. So I'm gonna put together a few more this weekend, and we'll get them all out there. I'm trying to get caught up, folks. I really am. So just give me a little bit of time. I apologize again for the time in between these episodes, but I'm gonna ramp them up and we'll get caught back up and get on a regular cadence. So again, I'm Ron Burke, Editor-in-Chief for GamingTrend.com. Thanks for joining me, and stay safe out there. We'll see you again real soon.